Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Julie Thomas and I'm going to be your guide for the next 45 to 50 minutes as we talk about the value of keeping our customers. I recently read a quote that's attributed to Peter Drucker, and it says, "The purpose of any business is to create and keep a customer." Well, over time, for many of us, it's harder and harder to keep those customers. When I first joined sales 30 years ago, I was in an inside sales role and solely responsible for partnering with my outside sales rep to renew the existing base. I actually had a quota that was tied to those renewals, and managing that customer retention process in order to ensure renewals was something that we were constantly working on. And at the time, when I would talk to some of my other friends in sales, what I was doing was unique. Many of my friends that were also in technology sales, they were selling enterprise software, or they were selling hardware. They were selling something that was bought one time. Now, you might want to sell more of it over time, but they weren't looking at their customer the way I was, looking at that client as a lifetime or a longer-term asset. That's changed. Many of our clients now are no longer selling enterprise software. They're selling software as a service, and it has to be renewed year in and year out. And even in other non-technology areas, everything seems to be moving to the service economy that we're now a part of. So customer retention has become more and more of a challenge for all of us. That's what we're going to talk about today, and that's what I'm going to share with you, some of what Value Selling shares with our clients as tactics and techniques to make sure that you are keeping your customers every year. So before we get started, just let me let you know that today's webinar is being recorded. It will be shared on valueselling.com later. You can either access the recording if you want to share with a colleague, or you will be able to download a PDF of these slides. Also, during today's session, please feel free to interact with us on social media. We'll be live tweeting during the webcast today to share some insight and ideas, and would love to interact with you on any of our social platforms throughout this session as well. So, retention, renewals, the whole concept of how do we keep our customers and clients over a longer period of time. And sometimes it feels like we are trying to bail ourselves out of a boat with a hole. From a corporate perspective, if we are losing customers at a similar rate to that we're getting new customers, we're not growing. And so for many of us, a key corporate strategy is how do we maintain these customers over time so that we can continue to grow. I recently read one research stat that said, all things being equal, if a company has a 10% customer retention rate greater than a competitor, so for example, let's say my customer retention rate is 90% and my closest competitor is 80%, the compound effect of that revenue growth will mean that I will double in the next 7 years, while my competitor will be left behind. So retention is not only critical for her short-term revenue, it's got extreme long-term implications as well. Often, customers will tell us that they leave because they're just not being paid attention to. So we're going to be talking about how customer experience is the new differentiator that many of us have to make sure that we are defending through that. So what is going on today? Well, we know our customers are an asset. We know that, that for many of us, we cannot achieve our quota if we are losing our install base. Many of my clients actually their quota is defined in terms of growth. So rather than say you've got $1 million revenue quota, I have clients that are being told you've got a $300,000 growth quota on top of a $750,000 base. So come, hell or high water, by the end of that time period, you have to have grown that base by $300,000 or whatever that growth quota is. Customer replacement, we know, is expensive. There's all kinds of data on that it is 5 times more to get a new customer than it is to keep an existing one. And that is the total cost of ownership or procurement for those customers, between all the resources that get involved in business development to what we need to do to maintain those relationships. And one of the challenges that we have is sometimes what the customer realizes as a result of doing business with us is different from their expectation. Warren Buffett made the statement years ago that says it can take up to 20 years to build a solid, good reputation for a business, but it only takes 5 minutes to ruin it. So making sure that that realization is aligned to that expectation is critical to customer retention. So let's look at a quick poll here. I'm going to open up a poll here, and what I'd like you to do is select which of these roles more accurately, or as close to accurate as possible, define your role. Are you on this session because you're only responsible for renewing your base? Maybe your title is account manager. Maybe you're even a service or support person, but you're responsible for renewals. Do you have some sort of a hybrid position where, yes, you're responsible for renewals in your base, but you also have a small new business quota in those existing accounts? Or do you kind of do both? Do you hunt and farm? Are you a manager, or are you something else? And if you're something else, just type in the chat maybe what that is, just so we get a feel for what who's on the line here with us today. And it looks like we've got some great responses here. So let me share with you the results here. Very interesting. 50% of you are some sort of a hybrid. You've got renewals and existing customers. That's fascinating. 25% of you are responsible for renewals and some upselling. So in addition to those renewals, you're expected to find ways to sell more stuff to them. Maybe that sell more comes through price increases when it comes to the time to ask them to ante up and do business with you again. Or maybe it's finding and creating opportunities for additional services. We'll see what that looks like. But by and large, the bulk of you have some sort of a hybrid role. Find that really fascinating. And we'll talk about today how we balance that, because it is a balancing act for 75% of you here today on the line. And whether we call it hunting or farming, hunting being the new business acquisition, farming being maximizing the revenue from our existing clients, or finding and minding, another way that I hear some clients talk about, finding new customers, minding that base. However it is, we've got to figure out how to make sure that we're doing both. And those of you on the phone do have to do what is essentially 2 different processes: customer acquisition and customer retention. So the question I have for you is, where do you put the most rigor in your sales process? Is your retention process as documented and well-defined and adhered to as your new business sales process? It's a rhetorical question that I'm asking each of you today, understanding that with reps primarily on the phone, you're not necessarily responsible for creating the process. But my experience has said that often clients put a whole lot of rigor, a whole lot of discipline, a whole lot of training on the new business side, and much less on the customer retention side. In some cases, we almost run into the trap of taking our current customers for granted. And we can't. They're an asset. They're precious. We need to care for them. We need to nurture them. And we need to make sure that we are meeting both their immediate and short-term needs and positioning ourselves for the long term. So let me ask you another question. Based on your experience, I'm going to launch this next poll. Why do people cancel? Why do people choose to non-renew or not to do business with us going forward? And I've got a couple different examples here. Pick as many as you want. It's not one. What do you hear from your clients when they decide not to do business with you? Interesting, getting lots of different support, lots of different comments. And sometimes I realize that it's not one situation that might come into this, into cancellation, but lots of different types of situations. So let's close out that poll at this time and let me share those results. And here we go again. Interestingly enough, well, something uncontrollable. For example, the client went out of business, or maybe there was a merger. Something that is completely outside of the scope of the customer experience and what you've done to renew them or have them not renew. That's not what we're going to be talking about today. There will always be a subset of our cancellations that are what I call uncontrollables. The company no longer exists. The company was gobbled up by another company that either has a contract that absorbed you or has a different preference, and therefore the people that you've worked with. So we're not going to address that today. What we are going to address are some of the first four. They didn't get what they expected. 62%, by far the largest, not by far, but a good chunk of you said almost 2/3 of the time when they cancel, they didn't get what they expected. That is something that we can better manage. Almost half of you say their needs have changed. So the question is, how can we evolve with our clients to make sure that we have these quote-unquote customers involved? Another 50% of you said there's new people involved. Well, the decision maker changed. So the guy that loved me and loved my product and decided to do business with me is no longer there or no longer in a decision-making role. So that's the reason that we lost that business. We can control that. We can manage that. And then over half, there was a bad customer experience. Customer experience in the service environment is absolutely the new differentiator that we need to proactively manage and share with and make sure that those customer experiences are extremely positive. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but interesting insight from that perspective. So what are we going to talk about specifically? Well, I'm going to give you strategies to increase the likelihood of creating long-term customers. So what can you do today in making sure that you have a long-term customer? We're going to talk about how to be proactive with the customer retention strategy. When I talk about customer retention, I am talking about the process that you and your organization have in place to make sure that your customers continue to do business with you. When I talk about the renewal, that is the physical act that your customer or your client goes through to remain a customer. So the retention strategy and process is ours. The renewal is what they do when our strategy is effective and hits on the mark with those prospects. We're also going to talk about some opportunities for additional business. Very few of you, as you have shared with us, aren't expected to somehow get new business. Again, that can come in a couple of different ways. It can come from price increases or packaging increases that you may be presenting to your prospects at renewal time. It could be from you creating new needs, new opportunities for additional products and services and expanding that relationship at the renewal time, or it could be just finding a new client altogether. But we're going to talk about how we get that additional business. And at the end of the day, When it comes to this retention process, we want to focus on how we can create with our clients reasons to stay. A fundamental principle of the value selling framework is that people need a reason to change. And when we're in the new business development mode, understanding that reason to change is key to our success at developing a new opportunity and winning a new client. When it comes to retention, we want to flip that. We need to make sure we understand what is their reason to stay and make sure they don't have a reason to change. And that's something that we need to work on. It should be no surprise to any of us that where we have existing clients, we also have a competitor trying to displace us. And they're going to be looking for the reason to change. And if you have had any negative experiences with that prospect, that could create the opportunity. We could be actually creating those opportunities for our prospects. So let's get into it. Here's some statistics that I pulled from a recent Serious Decisions research report where they went and surveyed a number of different customers in software industry, and they said, if you were renewing today, what do you think would happen? 42% of them said, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do. 45% of them said, part of the reason I'm not really sure about what I'm going to do is because I just didn't get what I expected. I didn't get the value, whatever that value proposition was that I expected. That said, the flip side of that, 50% of them said that they will buy more. So it's really this balancing act of figuring out where we are and which side of the equation that we're sitting on. So let's, just before we get into these strategies, make one more point. There is a huge amplification effect when we lose a client. Number one, if we lose a customer because they're dissatisfied, we know that they are likely to tell anybody and everybody who's willing to listen about a bad experience with us. They are likely to be the reference for the competitive alternative that they switch to that says, here is why I switched from company A to company B. There's a huge amplification effect of losing customers over time. We already talked about the expense of new business versus renewing business. But here's another piece of data that companies report that they don't stay with an existing supplier because they don't feel they've been listened to. They don't feel that they've been heard or understood. They don't think anybody cares about them anymore. So interesting data. I think it's overwhelming that so many people report less than satisfactory experiences across the board. This isn't specific to any company or any industry, but across the board, which means we've got tremendous opportunity for improvement. So let's talk about the 6 keys that we discuss with our clients about keeping our customers. Number 1, it is all about the relationship. Customer loyalty is a result of real connections at the people level. We know this is true when we're selling. We know this is true in new business acquisition. It is just as true and just as important when we get into the renewal situation. We need to be able to know our customers. This customer intimacy will create this customer loyalty, and customer loyalty is often a key determinant as to whether or not they renew. And we all know, just like in any relationship, where the relationship is strong, we're more forgiving. When our relationships are strong and something goes wrong, we tend to, as human beings, be much more forgiving if we know, like, and trust the person where something has gone wrong with, versus when they're a complete stranger. So how do we continue to show our prospects that we know them? Well, I gave you 2 pieces of data early on. Customers don't think they're listened to, and one of the key reasons that we lose customers is because people have changed. So do you have a relationship strategy with your prospects that is continuous. When changes are made organizationally, and there will always be changes made organizationally, do we have a proactive strategy to make sure we're identifying, gaining access, and getting to those people? The same techniques that we use in new business when we're trying to expand our footprint and our relationships with those clients can absolutely be used when it comes to our existing accounts. People buy from people. Have a relationship strategy and make sure that that relationship strategy is meeting their needs, not just your needs. The second tactic that we talk about is timing. I'm often asked, when does the customer renewal process start? Well, the reality is it starts with your very first new business sales call. It doesn't start at the end of a cycle. It starts before they're a customer. It starts with how we manage their expectations all the way through the sales cycle, through their experience with us after the fact. It starts with us delivering the right solutions to the right problems. One of the other reasons that we saw that people cancel is that their needs have changed. Well, along with that, sometimes we have been in the situation where we have tried to force fit a square peg into a round hole and set ourselves up for failure right at the beginning. Are we delivering on time? Are we doing what we said we're going to do? Are we adding value? And again, down to that relationship. Is that relationship solid? But the timing of retention is critical. If you leave with one memory or deliverable or key takeaway from this webinar, it's that retention is a process. It is not an event. We do not want to be hit and run salespeople where we get the contract, we disappear for 12 months or maybe 11 and a half months, and then we show up 30 to 15 days prior to the renewal and say, here's the next contract. And oh, by the way, my price has gone up. So we want to be very careful about that. The next key tactic is expectations, and we talked about that. Making sure that we have clear expectation, that we confirm those expectations, and that we've got solid communications. I read a research from TARP Worldwide, and here is some of the findings that they found. For existing companies, and this had to do with software as a service providers, when their clients said what were the things that they expected or realized after they became clients. The most important thing that these clients surveyed said is when I had service above and beyond expectations, I stayed with that client. Number two was when there were no unpleasant surprises, I stayed with that client. Number three was when I have a personal relationship, and every time I interact with that company, I have a fast and friendly interaction. I'm not stuck on hold. I'm not stuck in a queue. Fourth was companies that are proactive. They're proactively reaching out and providing help. And then the last one was just generically good service. All of those other things play into that. So do we have a communication strategy? Again, that no hit and run selling. Don't disappear after the contract. Make sure that you maintain and build that relationship. If you have other people in your organization that are going to over time take over that relationship, make sure it is a transition, not an event. Not a delegation and abdication and throw something over the transom. Make sure that the prospect and now your customer feels good about that transition and everything is good. Part of that expectation is making sure we're aware of buyer's remorse. Many of us can remember the whole concept of buyer's remorse from our economics class in college. But buyer's remorse is the fact that for many people, once a purchase decision is made, they come back and question that. They come back and say, oh, did I do the right thing? And if something goes wrong right out of the gates, that buyer's remorse is going to be much greater. So what can we do to mitigate and minimize that buyer's remorse with our clients? And then again, over the time with those expectations, we want to reinforce those decisions all the time. From the time that they're during the sales cycle, when we're focusing them on value realization, all through that customer life cycle and relationship. As a matter of fact, I have a few clients that have very deliberate customer retention strategies, and they have milestones that their sales reps are held accountable to, where they have to sit down with the executives in their clients, the people that were involved in the decision and utilizing their products and services, and go through a utilization report, measure the value and the impact, demonstrate how good that relationship was, and make sure all along that that they are fulfilling the expectations of those clients and ideally overachieving those expectations. Expectations have to do with value and have to do with managing that over time, making sure that we are not only adding value to the business, but to the people that we work with. And then again, anticipating and often educating on what we can do from a proactive basis to continue to build and maintain that relationship. One of the things that is critical, and as silly as this sounds, or as obvious as this sounds, it is often a key reason for A, dissatisfaction, and B, cancellations. Have we sold the right products and services to begin with? Did we really position the solutions that we're having to problems that they knew that we're solving? And were we as thorough in that process to make sure that they're buying the right thing to begin with? If we have misalignment from there, we will be set up from failure from the get-go. Now, there may be strategies that we can put in place to reposition, repackage, repurpose, what have you. But if they have bought something that they think does something and it doesn't do that, we're in trouble right out of the gates. So making sure that we don't set ourselves up for failure and thinking not about just the short-term order, but the long-term relationship is critical key for keeping our customers and clients. And again, sometimes it might be great if we have a client that says, hey, I just want to buy this today, and we know that it's not necessarily perfect, or we don't even know why they're buying it. We could end up being this square peg in a round hole, and again, setting ourselves up for failure. So that alignment is critical, that making sure we do this. We often talk to our existing clients in new business that when we've got clients that just want to buy from us and aren't going through some sort of a disclosure or discovery process where we really understand and collaborate together on the right package and solution for them, we can set ourselves up to be in trouble. And it's hard not to rush the sales process when people are ready to buy. And sometimes it's okay to do that, but sometimes it will end up biting us in the butt and the back end when we lose that client, and again, recognize that amplification of that short-term gain for long at the expense of long-term customer satisfaction is typically not where we want to be as a company. So again, we talked about, is there a reason to stay or change? And thinking about that with our clients, we want to really understand what is their reason to stay or change. Has something changed, and do we need to reposition that? The other thing that's really interesting that when we think about this is clients report or customers report that if there has been an unresolved problem, they are more sensitive to price and price increases. So even if a client is planning to stay, but there's been an unresolved situation or dissatisfaction of any type, you can expect you're going to get beat up on price, and a price increase is going to probably be very difficult. So understanding that is really also important. And then last but not least, have you requalified the opportunity? Once a need is met, we know from sociology, it is no longer a motivating factor. So we often need to reconnect to what's going on in the business today that may be slightly different from 12 months ago to make sure that we still are the perceived and confirmed as the right opportunity. So do you requalify that opportunity? And if we do it with the rigor that we qualify our new business opportunities, we will A, identify if people have changed, B, identify if how they're going to measure the value or the impact of our solution has changed, C, become aware of what competitive alternatives might be looking at trying to steal that customer from us, and C, can build a plan that has to do with timing again in terms of making sure there's no gap in service, etc. That qualification model fits as significantly for renewals as it does for new business. People make emotional buying decisions for logical reasons. Remember, if somebody feels that they haven't been heard or they're frustrated, even if the product is doing what it should do, you could be at risk. And personal value is critical when it comes to the renewal space because it is about relationship. They have had an experience, and if it's an unpleasant experience, they probably don't want to live that for another 12 months. So understanding that personal value and making those personal connections are critical. And last but not least, when something's broken, fix it. We know that things go wrong. I mean, it's just life. Nothing's perfect. Companies aren't perfect. Software isn't perfect. Products aren't perfect. People aren't perfect. But when something's broken and we fix it, we will be in a better position than if we ignore it. And again, the stronger the relationship, the more forgiving the client. So let's talk about some strategies around that. Oftentimes, this is a great place where we can introduce other resources. Maybe there's a difficult message that needs to be delivered to a prospect for whatever reason. That's maybe where you want to maintain the relationship and use some other resource to actually deliver that difficult message, whether it's your manager or an executive or somebody else. But use your resources. Don't go it alone when those messages are difficult. And always remember, sometimes it's not perfect resolution that matters. It's the small steps and progress towards resolution that really matter. So making sure that we're constantly doing that, working towards acknowledging and fixing and improving is critical. Let's talk about a couple strategies that we share with our clients about repairing relationships when they do go south. So first of all, there's a couple things that we can do on a preventative way, making sure that there is no miscommunication, and often that plays down to written communication. It is very easy for you or I to forget exactly what was said last Friday at 2 o'clock when you and I ran into each other in the lobby of a building and had a quick conversation. We don't want to leave key expectations up to the memory of either an individual or a group of individuals who've got a lot of stuff going on. So communicate in writing is absolutely a preventative way. Making sure we don't make any assumptions. Just because somebody hasn't complained doesn't necessarily mean that they're happy. So we don't want to make any assumptions, and we want to make sure we understand things. Being honest and upfront is always part of a good relationship. And then being accountable for what is going on, especially if we're the ones that have made set expectations, making sure that we own it. When things go wrong, what can we do to restore those relationships? Well, one of the best things to do is just kind of back up and start over. Can we rewind and start this conversation over and go back and make sure that we're on the same page? Trying to find the positive. Rarely is everything broken. There's usually a few things that are going right. So let's leverage the positive and focus on how we can leverage that to move forward. Taking responsibility is kind of like being accountable, being proactive. If we know something's going wrong, being proactive will be huge as opposed to waiting, well, maybe they won't notice. And then developing a mutual plan with them on how to repair the relationship and make sure that we're back on track is also important. And better yet, if that plan, again, is in writing, you can hold yourself accountable, but you can also be working together toward a mutual goal with the prospects. One thing that I always asked my clients when I was in a renewal situation is, if you had to renew today, would you? I would ask that question 30 days into the contract, 60 days into the contract, constantly. Anytime you have an opportunity to engage with your prospects and we are asking if you had the opportunity to renew today, would you? You will uncover where there might be work to do to either prevent something from going further sideways or restore something that has gone sideways that might not have been obvious to you or understood by you. So if you had to renew today, would you? Why or why not? Great question to build into every interaction when you're talking with existing clients. So let's talk about, what do we want to do? Well, we've talked about that retention is a process. And like any process, for it to be successful, it has to be managed and there has to be a plan to it. Clients that we have that experience good renewal rates and high retention rates are the ones that have a deliberate process around it. And that process includes, what are the tools to manage that process? Who are the people and resources dedicated to that process, and what are the expectations that we manage as a result of that? What are our milestones? What are our objectives that we manage to from that perspective? So as you go through your renewal process, I would ask you to go through some of what we've talked about and inspect those existing customers and customer relationships. One of the reasons that we chose to do this webinar this time of the year is often the end of the calendar year is a huge time for contracts. People are budgeting today. If they are going to make a decision to change, they might be going through that evaluation today, but they're looking at what they're going to do for next year. So now, if you haven't deliberately and intentionally started to focus on what is going on in your existing base, now would be the time to do it. And assess the health of the situation. Looking at those six strategies that we talked about. How is the relationship? What has been our engagement? How often have we been in touch with the people involved in that purchase decision? What have their expectations been? What has their utilization been? Have they been using the products? Did they get the right products to begin with? Where do we think that renewal is today? And have we asked them if they're ready to renew yet? And then where do we need to repair, if we do, any relationship that we have? And also understand, as a part of that, you will have competitors in there. I call them the ambulance chasers that are in there just trying to supplant you and replace you. Those are the people that come in. Maybe they have inferior products. Maybe they don't. Maybe they have a good product or an equivalent product. but they're the ones in there saying, if you love them, you'll really love me because I'm better, faster, cheaper, whatever. Making sure we are defending that base is critical. After you go through that assessment, what do you need to do differently? Maybe it's as simple as pick up the phone. Maybe it's as simple as schedule a cup of coffee or a virtual cup of coffee, and getting engaged, looking at that utilization, looking at their usage, all of those types of things. And then create that strategy to redefine and requalify that opportunity. What is their reason to stay? What is the value that not only they've gotten for the past period of time that they've been engaged with them, but that we should continue to expand and deliver in the future? Who new has to be involved? What is going on from that perspective? We want to really get rigorous and disciplined around treating the renewals with the same amount of focus and process as we do new business. We want to make sure that they're qualified, and that if they're not, we are requalifying and doing that work to do that. And then start to execute on that plan. Make sure that we are executing on that retention strategy, that retention process, which says we have a long-term strategy on how we're going to maintain and grow our base. We want customers for life. We don't want customers for a day. And how are we approaching everything we do to engage around them from that perspective? And think about this. Gartner, I read in a recent magazine article, talks about the Pareto principle. Everybody is probably familiar with the Pareto principle, and that's kind of the 80-20 rule. And no matter what you're doing, the 80-20 rule probably withholds. 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts. 80% of your revenue come from 20% of your customers. Well, that's Gartner's point. 80% of your future revenue, long-term future revenue, according to an analyst at Gartner, comes from 20% of your existing customers. The challenge is we don't know which 20% it is. So we need to have a strategy to keep them all as much and minimize and reduce the controllable cancellations so that we are positioned for long-term growth in the marketplace. So as we go into this, let me ask, are there any questions? I appreciate that you've joined us today. We've had a lot of different ideas to talk about. But let's look at some of the questions and comments on here. Andy said one of the reasons that a client didn't renew was they just plumb ran out of money. Well, that's kind of like going out of business if they ran out of money. But if they're just telling you they ran out of money and the doors are open, they're spending money. So then maybe we have been reprioritized in terms of what that is. Here's another question here that says, you say that the retention strategy starts from the very first contact. What practically does that mean? What that means is in our sales cycle, one of the value selling framework core tenets and tactics that we teach to our sales clients is that you want to not only focus on getting the customer the first time, but focus the customer on the long-term value they're going to receive from doing business with you. And we use that, what we call value realization, as almost the compelling event to make sure that we get the inertia to close the business. Well, if we also use that value realization in the sales cycle, we can use focusing on beyond the act of making an initial purchase to what are we going to do together to ensure you get that value. What does that relationship look like over time? Set, manage, and get buy-in to those expectations during the sales cycle, and then be prepared to deliver on that and not be that quote unquote hit and run sales rep. So here's an interesting question. What if you don't manage the day-to-day service team and they're incented to maintain the quality of the client relationship? And I'm assuming that I'm going to read into that question. If there's more to it, please clarify that there might be some tension between providing good service and potentially the ability to upsell or resell. Or they're not, thank you for the clarification there, they're not incented the same way that you are. So you've kind of got a disconnect in the company. Well, in those situations, we have to find ways to quote unquote manage without authority. How do we build comprehensive organizational strategies around centering around those clients to make that happen? And if there's some dysfunction or misalignment in the organization, sometimes those need to be worked out at a level outside of the worker bees that are out in there. But in the meantime, we can build consensus in relationship with our counterparts, and at least making sure that we're all on the same page, that our incentive, our personal motivation is together, make sure that not only this client is happy and getting the right level of service, but that because of that, they are going to stay in business with us for a long time. But I recently worked with a company, and it was a partnering situation. So there was a customer service manager that was partnered with a sales rep, and the customer service manager was really good at his job. And in that being really good at maintaining that customer service, he was starting to give away additional value associated with additional components of service that we could charge for. And so because that partnership was tight, as that customer service manager was finding opportunities for kind of giving taste to additional levels of service, he partnered very effectively with his outside account executive, and they built a plan to then get money for those additional services. At the end of the day, most of you on this line are not working for a not-for-profit. So most of you today are working for a company that is somehow, some way trying to make some money as we go through this. Let me see another question. What if your company sells products that are not in the core business of your customers, and he sees you as not very important to spend time with? Isn't that always a challenge that we often have? Why do I need to spend time with you? This is a utility for my business. This is something that I just expect to work, and I don't need to spend time with that. I think there's a couple things. What can we do to try to mitigate the fact that they blow us off on a regular basis? And again, some of that is expectations that we try to manage during the sales cycle. Number two, it's making sure that our products and services continue to be connected to an overarching business issue, business objective, business drivers of those organizations. So even though we might be a little piece of technology in a much bigger process, how do we make sure that we stay connected to those overarching business issues? And then number three, I think often we can be really successful if we cast wider nets in our organizations. If we're not trying to just deal with one person, even if that one person is the key decision maker, obviously we want to know who they are and do everything we can to find ways to gain and maintain access to those individuals. But in addition to that, we want to have relationships with everybody, from the users to the implementers to the decision makers, and really think about how we can cast that wider net. It mitigates our risk of having a single point of failure when it comes to any renewal. which can also be, hey, I've got a great relationship with Susie, and Susie just up and left the company, and now I've got nobody. So one of our preventative strategies, and in the absence of somebody not being willing to meet with us, might be to try to create a broader net, broader access, and then negotiate and partner through that access to maintain access. So with that, I am going to wrap up, share some future information from you about value selling. If there are questions that I haven't gotten to, please let me reach out to me directly, or I will reach out to you and answer them as best as I can in email. I do want to let you know about two exciting new offerings from Value Selling. One has to do with filling your funnel, and it's a new course that we're offering on board on prospecting. If you're interested in that, please contact your Value Selling associate, contact or myself, as well as a new online offering called Executive Speak, which is all about how to prepare for an executive meeting. Gets into business acumen, how businesses operate, what executives' roles and responsibilities are doing. So if you're interested in either one of those, please let us know. Again, I mentioned that we're active on social media. We'd love to engage with you both online as well as offline. And last but not least, please save the date. Our next webinar will be in 1 month, October 19th. And Marilyn Janis, one of our seasoned facilitators and experts here at Value Selling, is going to talking about how to make it happen. What are the processes that we can do to affect change in our sales organizations, both from a systemic organizational perspective as well as from an individual perspective? That link will be live shortly, and we hope to see you again on October 19th. Last but not least, please don't hesitate to contact me directly if there's anything we here at Value Selling Associates can do for you. I thank you for joining us today. I hope you all have a wonderful quarter end as we get ready to close out September and are prepared to hit the ground running with high retention rates and high renewals from your clients from this point forward. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.